Sometimes, a single sentence can start a war. The desert wind rolled across the Arizona territory like dry ocean waves, carrying dust through the Apache camp as flames from the ceremonial fire climbed into the black sky. Elias Mercer sat quietly near the horse pens, pretending not to notice the warriors watching him from the shadows. He had come to the camp for one reason only: trade 6 horses, collect his pay, and ride north before sunrise. Men like him did not belong in Apache ceremonies. White cowboys especially knew better than to linger once the drums began. But something about that night felt wrong from the moment he arrived. The warriors stood too still. The elders whispered too softly. Even the horses shifted nervously against their reins, ears twitching toward the canyon beyond camp. Elias adjusted the brim of his hat and kept his eyes low. Trouble usually found the loudest man first. He had survived 34 years in the West by staying quiet. Then the drums stopped. Every voice vanished with them. Elias looked up just as an Apache woman stepped into the firelight. She moved slowly, but there was nothing weak about her. Tall, dark braids resting over buckskin decorated with silver beads that caught the flames every time she breathed. The older warriors lowered their heads when she passed. The younger ones stepped aside without a word. Elias had seen dangerous men before. Soldiers, outlaws, railroad enforcers. But this woman carried something heavier than danger. Authority. An elder beside the fire raised a carved staff toward her. "Choose," he said quietly. Elias frowned. He had heard rumors about Apache ceremonies, stories traded between ranchers late at night over whiskey bottles and poker tables. But most frontier stories were nonsense born from fear. He assumed she would choose one of the warriors standing proudly around the fire. A future husband, perhaps, or a protector. Instead, the woman walked straight through the circle, past every Apache warrior, past the sons of chiefs and hunters and fighters. She stopped directly in front of Elias Mercer. The fire cracked loudly behind her. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse snorted. Elias slowly stood, nearly 6 feet tall himself, yet somehow she still seemed impossible to look away from. Her eyes held the stillness of deep water before a storm. Then she placed her hand against his chest. "Warm, steady, certain. You are the man I choose," she said. The entire camp froze. A young warrior immediately grabbed the handle of his knife. Another took one step forward before an elder blocked his path with a single raised hand. Elias felt every stare in the camp land on him at once. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came, because the woman was still looking at him like she had known him for years. "I think," Elias finally muttered carefully, "you've mistaken me for somebody else." A few warriors exchanged dark looks, but the woman never blinked. "No," she whispered. "I chose the right man." The old elder near the fire stepped closer, smoke curling around the lines of his weathered face. "Then his life belongs to the tribe now." Elias felt the air turn cold despite the flames beside him. Before he could ask what that meant, the distant sound of galloping horses thundered through the canyon. Fast, panicked, wrong. Every warrior turned toward the darkness at once. And somewhere beyond the firelight, a rider screamed. The rider burst from the canyon like a ghost chased by thunder, his horse covered in sweat and dust, foam dripping from its mouth as it stumbled into the edge of the firelight. Several Apache warriors rushed forward instantly, catching the man before he fell completely from the saddle. Elias stepped back as the camp erupted into movement around him. Women pulled children away from the center fire. Young warriors grabbed rifles and bows from beside tents. The calm silence from moments earlier vanished beneath sharp voices and the restless sound of horses pulling at their ropes. The injured rider clutched desperately at Niyeli's wrist. His breathing came hard, uneven, like every word cost him pain. Elias could not understand most of the Apache language spilling from the man's mouth, but one word repeated again and again. "Soldiers." Niyeli's face hardened with every sentence. The warmth she had shown Elias only moments earlier disappeared behind. Something colder, fear mixed with anger. The rider finally pressed something into her hand before his strength gave out completely. A silver badge caught the firelight. "Sheriff's badge." Elias narrowed his eyes immediately. "Where did he get that?" he asked. No one answered him. The old elder beside the fire took the badge slowly from Niyeli's hand and turned it over in silence. The metal reflected orange flames across his weathered face. Then Elias saw it. Scratched into the back of the silver star was a symbol he recognized instantly. A small curved brand mark shaped like a broken horseshoe. His stomach tightened. He had seen that mark before, years ago, burned into wooden crates filled with army rifles near the New Mexico border. Only one man used that symbol. Silas Vane, gun trader, land buyer. The kind of man who smiled while entire towns destroyed themselves around him. That badge does not belong to the sheriff, Elias said quietly. Several warriors looked toward him at once. Niyeli stepped closer. You know this mark? She asked. Elias nodded slowly, unable to pull his eyes away from the badge. A man named Silas Vane uses it. He sells weapons where trouble is growing, usually right before people start blaming each other. A younger Apache warrior spat into the dirt near Elias's boots. White men always bring trouble. Elias almost answered back, but stopped himself. Because deep down, he understood why the man believed it. Niyeli raised her hand before the tension could spread further. Enough. Her voice cut through the camp like a knife through cloth. The warriors obeyed immediately. That alone told Elias how important she truly was. She motioned for him to follow her away from the fire. They walked toward the edge of the camp where the desert opened wide beneath the moonlight. Cold wind rolled down from the rocks, carrying the smell of dust and sagebrush. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Elias noticed how carefully the Apache guards watched him now from a distance. Not like a guest anymore, like a responsibility, or a threat. Niyeli finally stopped beside a weathered cedar post tied with strips of red cloth. Do you know what it means when an Apache woman chooses a man before the tribe? She asked softly. Elias shook his head. I figured it was bad for my future. For the first time since the rider arrived, a faint smile touched her face. Small, tired, gone almost immediately. It means your life becomes tied to ours, she said. If blood is spilled against this tribe now, your name will stand beside ours. Elias stared at her carefully. You did not choose me because you know me. Niyeli looked back toward the frightened campfires flickering behind them. No, she whispered. I chose you because I know what is coming. Then somewhere far across the valley, beyond the dark hills and sleeping desert, a faint orange glow rose slowly into the night sky. Fire. And every warrior in the camp saw it at the same moment. The orange glow spread wider against the night sky, flickering behind the distant hills like a second sunset rising in the wrong direction. Every conversation in the Apache camp died instantly. Elias watched warriors climb onto rocks and wagons for a better view, while mothers pulled blankets tighter around frightened children. Nobody needed to explain what fire meant out here. Fire at night meant ranches' homes. Families waking to smoke instead of morning light. Niyeli stared toward the horizon without blinking. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint smell of burned cedar through the valley. That is near Black Creek, Elias said quietly. 3 ranches sit out there. An older Apache warrior beside him answered coldly. And tomorrow white men will say Apache burned them. Elias could not argue with that either, because he knew exactly how frontier towns worked. Fear moved faster than truth. Always had. A young scout rushed through camp carrying a rifle almost too large for his shoulders. He spoke quickly to Niyeli, his voice sharp with panic. She listened silently, then turned toward Elias. Tracks were found south of the canyon this morning, she said. Boots from army horses. Not Apache. Elias frowned. Then why hide it? Niyeli looked at him steadily. Because men already want war more than facts. Those words settled heavily between them. The camp around them had become restless. Now, saddles tightened, ammunition checked, horses calmed with soft hands and whispered Apache prayers. Elias noticed something strange though. Despite the tension, nobody shouted. Nobody bragged about revenge. The fear here felt different from the fear inside frontier saloons. Quieter, sadder, like people who had already seen too many graves. The old elder approached again carrying the silver sheriff badge wrapped in cloth. He held it toward Elias carefully. You know this man called Silas Vane, he said. Tell me what kind of spirit he carries. Elias rubbed dust between his fingers before answering. The kind that gets rich while other men bury their sons. The elder nodded once as though that confirmed something important. Then he handed the badge back to Niyeli and walked away without another word. Elias watched him disappear into the firelight before lowering his voice. You still have not told me why you chose me. Niyeli remained silent for a moment. The desert wind tugged gently against the beads woven into her braids. 3 winters ago, she finally said, I saw you in Red Hollow. Elias stiffened slightly. He remembered Red Hollow, a cavalry supply town filled with whiskey, railroad men, and too many soldiers pretending not to be afraid. I was leaving the army then, he said carefully. You stood outside the station while soldiers laughed about burning an Apache village, Niyeli continued. But you did not laugh with them. Elias looked away toward the fire on the horizon. That does not make me a good man. No, Niyeli whispered. It makes you a man who still feels shame. The words hit harder than he expected, because shame was exactly why he had spent the last 4 years drifting from ranch to ranch across Arizona territory, avoiding towns whenever possible, speaking little, sleeping less. Some memories followed a man no matter how many miles he rode. Before Elias could answer, another rider came racing into camp from the western ridge. This one did not carry panic. He carried news. The warrior slid from his horse and spoke directly to Niyeli in a low, urgent voice. Elias only caught 2 English words inside the stream of Apache speech. Sheriff. Dawson. Nayeli's expression darkened immediately. The sheriff is riding here tonight, she said quietly. Elias frowned. For peace. She looked him directly in the eyes. No, she whispered. For someone to blame. Then, far beyond the canyon walls, the faint sound of many horses echoed across the sleeping desert. The sound of approaching horses rolled across the desert slowly at first, almost gentle beneath the wind, but everyone in the Apache camp understood what it meant. Riders. Many of them. Elias stood near the outer fire pit watching shadows move across the canyon walls while warriors spread quietly through the camp like smoke before a storm. No panic now, just preparation. A young Apache mother hurried past carrying a sleeping child wrapped in blankets, her eyes lowered, her footsteps quick. Somewhere nearby, an old man began singing softly beneath his breath. Elias did not know the words, but the sound carried the weight of grief older than any frontier map. Niyeli stepped beside him, holding the silver sheriff badge tightly in one hand. Sheriff Dawson will not come alone, she said. Elias nodded once. Men get brave when they ride in groups. Niyeli glanced toward him. And what do men become when they are afraid? Elias looked toward the growing glow of fire still staining the horizon. Dangerous. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cold desert air smelled of smoke and horse leather. Somewhere behind them, an Apache elder fed cedar branches into the ceremonial fire, sending sparks swirling upward into the black sky like lost souls trying to escape the earth. Elias noticed the warriors watching Niyeli carefully now, not just with respect, with expectation. She carried responsibility here, the kind that crushed people slowly over time. There is something you still do not understand, Niyeli said quietly. When I chose you tonight, I did not only bind your name to the tribe. Elias frowned slightly. Then what else did you do? Her dark eyes held his for a long second before she answered. I stopped my own warriors from starting this war before sunrise. The words settled heavily in his chest. Elias glanced toward the armed Apache men moving through camp. Most looked young, too young, faces hardened by dust and hunger and stories passed down from older generations. Men who had grown up hearing about broken treaties and burned villages. Men already carrying anger before ever holding a rifle. Some of them want revenge, Elias said carefully. Niyeli gave a faint nod. And some settlers want our land more than peace. She turned the sheriff badge slowly in her hand. That is why men like Silas Vane survive. Fear feeds them. Elias stared at her in silence. The firelight softened the sharpness in her face now, but exhaustion remained there beneath the surface. Not weakness, just the kind of tiredness that came from holding too many people together at once. You said you knew what was coming, Elias finally said. Tell me the truth. How bad is this? Niyeli looked away toward the canyon. For the first time since he met her, uncertainty crossed her face. 3 weeks ago, Apache scouts found hidden rifles near Black Creek, she whispered. Enough weapons to arm both settlers and warriors. Elias felt his stomach tighten immediately. Vane. Yes. Her voice dropped lower. Then ranches started burning. Cattle vanished. Scouts disappeared. Every trail pointed at someone else. Elias rubbed his jaw slowly beneath the brim of his hat. It was too familiar. Too clean. Real hatred was messy, but this felt arranged. like someone moving pieces across a chessboard while everyone else stared only at the next fire. "And Sheriff Dawson?" he asked. Niyeli's expression darkened. "He used to protect peace between the valley and our tribe." "Used to?" She hesitated before answering. "Last month his son disappeared near Apache land." Elias exhaled quietly. That explained enough. Grief made men easy to manipulate, especially fathers. A sudden cry echoed from the northern ridge. One sharp whistle, then another. Apache guards signaling movement. The entire camp became still again. Elias turned toward the darkness just as torchlight appeared between the canyon rocks far below. One torch, then 6, then dozens more rising slowly through the night, like a river of fire climbing toward the Apache camp. Niyeli's fingers tightened. Around the silver badge. "They came faster than I thought," she whispered. Then Elias noticed something that made the blood drain from his face. Riding at the very front beside Sheriff Dawson was a man wearing a black coat marked with the broken horseshoe brand of Silas Vane. The line of torches climbed higher through the canyon, slow and steady, until the entire valley below looked like a river of fire cutting through the darkness. Elias counted at least 30 riders, maybe more hidden behind the rocks. Sheriff Dawson rode near the front with his shoulders stiff beneath a long brown coat, his silver badge reflecting the torchlight each time his horse moved. But Elias barely looked at the sheriff anymore. His eyes stayed fixed on the man beside him. Black coat, black gloves, calm posture in the saddle like he was arriving for business instead of riding into the edge of a war. Silas Vane. Even from 200 yards away, Elias recognized the man instantly. Some faces never left your memory, especially the faces tied to regret. "You know him well," Niyeli said quietly beside him. Elias did not answer right away. The torches below painted shifting shadows across the canyon walls while Apache warriors silently formed lines near the outer edges of camp. Rifles stayed lowered for now, but hands rested close. Too close. 4 years ago, Elias finally said, Silas Vane sold rifles to settlers near the New Mexico border. 2 weeks later, settlers blamed Apache raiders for stolen cattle. He paused, jaw tightening beneath the brim of his hat. Turned out the cattle were hidden less than 10 miles from town the entire time. Niyeli watched him carefully. And what happened after the blame started? Elias looked back toward the approaching riders. Men stopped asking questions. The answers settled heavily between them, because both of them understood what fear could do once enough people believed they were already under attack. Sheriff Dawson suddenly raised one hand below, signaling his riders to stop near the mouth of the canyon. The torches steadied. Horses snorted clouds into the cold desert air. Nobody moved for several seconds. Then Silas Vane slowly rode forward. Alone. Even at a distance, Elias could see the easy confidence in the man's posture. Not nervous, not angry, comfortable, like a gambler already holding the winning cards. "That man smiles while towns burn," Elias muttered quietly. Niyeli turned toward him. "How do you know?" Elias rubbed his thumb slowly against the old scar near his wrist. "Because I used to work for people like him." Niyeli said nothing after that, but he felt her eyes on him for a long moment before she looked back toward the canyon. Somewhere behind them, the old Apache elder began speaking softly with the younger warriors. Several shook their heads angrily. One pointed down toward the riders below, another toward Elias himself. Tension spread through camp like dry brush catching sparks. Elias understood enough frontier politics to recognize danger when it started splitting into sides. Then Silas Vane called out from below. His voice carried surprisingly well through the canyon. Smooth, friendly, dangerous because of how reasonable it sounded. "Sheriff Dawson only wants to talk," he shouted. "Nobody came here looking for trouble tonight." A bitter laugh escaped one of the Apache warriors near Elias. "Then why bring 30 armed men?" No answer came from below. Elias watched Sheriff Dawson carefully instead. The sheriff looked exhausted. Older than Elias remembered. His posture lacked the confidence of a man certain he was doing the right thing. Grief sat heavily on him now, visible even from a distance. His son disappeared near Apache land, Elias said quietly to Niyeli. "That makes him easy to steer." Niyeli nodded once. Silas Vane understands wounded men. The firelight below flickered across Vane's black coat as he slowly removed one glove and raised something into the air. A silver necklace. Elias frowned immediately. Niyeli's breath caught beside him. That belonged to my brother, she whispered. The entire camp seemed to freeze around them. Elias looked at her sharply. Your brother is dead? Niyeli never took her eyes off the necklace below. No, she said softly. That is what frightens me. Then Silas Vane smiled faintly beneath the torchlight and called out one sentence that sent cold silence through the entire Apache camp. If you want your brother alive, he shouted, send the cowboy down alone. The desert went silent after Silas Vane's words, the kind of silence that only happens when every soul present suddenly understands how fragile peace really is. Elias stood motionless near the edge of the Apache camp while torchlight flickered below the canyon. Send the cowboy down alone. The sentence echoed through his mind heavier than gunfire ever could. Around him, Apache warriors tightened their grips on rifles and bows. Several stared at Elias now with open suspicion, as if wondering whether he had walked into their camp by accident or by design. Niyeli still held her brother's silver necklace in trembling fingers. Elias noticed that detail immediately. Until now, she had controlled every emotion crossing her face. Fear, anger, grief. She carried them like a leader forced to hide cracks in stone. But this was different. This was family. Your brother is alive, Elias said quietly. Niyeli nodded once without looking at him. His name is Maddo. The wind pushed smoke through the camp, carrying sparks high into the dark sky while horses shifted nervously against their ropes. Somewhere nearby, a child started crying before his mother hushed him softly beneath a blanket. Elias watched the riders below carefully. Sheriff Dawson remained near the back now, shoulders slumped slightly in the saddle, while Silas Vane sat perfectly calm at the front like a man controlling both sides of a card game. That frightened Elias more than anger would have. Calm men caused the worst disasters. This is what he wanted all along, Elias muttered. Niyeli finally turned toward him. What do you mean? Elias kept his eyes on Vane. A hostage ties emotions to fear. Fear kills reason. Once reason dies, men stop listening. One of the younger Apache warriors stepped forward suddenly, his face sharp with rage. Then let us ride now and take Maddo back. Several others nodded immediately. Elias recognized that look in their eyes. Hurt disguised as courage. The old elder near the fire raised one hand slowly. Silence returned at once. The old man studied Elias carefully before speaking. You have seen this before. It was not a question. Elias exhaled slowly beneath the brim of his hat. Too many times. The elder nodded as though confirming something he already knew. Then he motioned toward the canyon below. Tell us what happens if angry men ride down there tonight. Elias looked at the torches, at the rifles, at the nervous horses stamping against stone. He remembered another night years ago near the New Mexico border. Another valley. Another frightened group of settlers and Apache scouts staring at each other while men like Silas Vane whispered lies into both camps. He still remembered the smoke afterward. The empty homes. The silence. If men ride tonight, Elias said quietly, then by sunrise nobody remembers how this started. They only remember who they lost. No one answered him after that. Even the angry young warrior lowered his eyes slightly. Niyeli stepped closer until she stood beside Elias near the edge of the canyon. The firelight softened the sharp lines of her face, but exhaustion still lived there. That is why I chose you, she whispered. Elias frowned faintly. Because I know what war looks like. Niyeli shook her head slowly. Because you are one of the few men I have ever seen who fears it. The words struck deeper than she probably realized. Elias had spent 4 years pretending he left the cavalry because he wanted freedom. But freedom had nothing to do with it. He left because every time he closed his eyes, he still heard frightened voices carried through smoke and desert wind. Before he could answer, movement below caught his attention. Silas Vane slowly lifted a lantern into the air with one hand. Then another rider emerged beside him from the shadows holding someone bound across a saddle horse. Niyeli's breathing stopped completely beside Elias. Even from this distance, the silver necklace hanging against the prisoner's chest caught the firelight. Maddo. Then Silas Vane smiled faintly up toward the Apache camp and called out one final sentence. You have until sunrise to send the cowboy down, he shouted. After that, peace rides away with me. The torches below the canyon burned through the night like watchful eyes that refused to close. Nobody in the Apache camp slept after Silas Vane's ultimatum. Warriors remained near the ridges with rifles across their knees while elders whispered quietly around the fading ceremonial fire. The desert itself seemed restless now. Wind moved through the canyon carrying dust, smoke, and the distant sound of horses shifting in the darkness below. Elias sat alone near the edge of camp beside a dying cedar fire, staring into the coals while old memories crawled through his mind like ghosts refusing burial. For years earlier, he had stood in another valley under another cold sky while frightened men convinced themselves they were protecting their families. By sunrise, both sides had lost more than land. He still remembered the silence afterward most of all. Not the shouting, not the gun smoke. The silence. Boots pressed softly against the dirt behind him. Elias did not turn. He already knew it was Niyeli. She lowered herself beside the fire slowly, wrapping a wool blanket tighter around her shoulders against the cold desert air. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The flames cracked quietly between them. "My brother used to sit exactly like you," Niyeli said softly at last. Elias glanced toward her. Quiet. A faint smile touched her face, like a man carrying things too heavy to name. Elias looked back into the fire. "Then your brother must have been smarter than me. I spent years pretending I carried nothing." Niyeli studied him carefully beneath the shifting firelight. "And now?" Elias rubbed his thumb slowly against the scar on his wrist again. "Now I know silence does not bury anything." The wind stirred her dark braids gently as she looked toward the canyon below, where Silas Vane's torches still flickered between the rocks. "Matto always believed peace was possible," she whispered. "Even after soldiers destroyed villages near the northern rivers. Even after settlers stole grazing land." Her voice lowered further. "That is why Vane took him. Matto speaks to both sides." Elias nodded slowly. "Men like Vane fear people who build bridges." Niyeli's eyes drifted toward him again. "And what about you?" Elias frowned faintly. "What about me? Why did you truly leave the cavalry?" The question settled heavily between them. Elias stared into the coals for a long moment before answering. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted softly in the darkness. "Because one night," he said quietly, "my commanding officer ordered us to ride into an Apache village after a ranch burned near Tucson." Niyeli remained completely still beside him. Elias swallowed hard before continuing. "We thought we were hunting raiders." The fire cracked sharply between them. "But when we arrived, I found families. Children. Old people." His jaw tightened. "Wrong people. Wrong village. Wrong war." Niyeli lowered her eyes slowly. Elias could still smell the smoke when he remembered that night. Still hear frightened voices carried through desert wind. "I left the army the next morning," he whispered. "Never wore the uniform again." Silence returned after that. Heavy. Honest. The kind of silence shared only between people finally standing without lies. Then Niyeli reached into the folds of her blanket and pulled out something small wrapped in leather cloth. She placed it carefully into Elias's hand. A silver pendant shaped like a hawk feather. Old. Worn smooth by years of carrying. "Matto gave me this before he disappeared," she said softly. Elias turned the pendant over in his palm. Scratched faintly into the silver was the same broken horseshoe symbol used by Silas Vane. "He was tracking Vane," Elias muttered. Niyeli nodded once. "And now Vane wants you." Elias stared toward the torches below again. The answer finally became clear enough to taste. Silas Vane did not want a hostage exchange. He wanted a witness buried. Someone who recognized the truth behind the fires and missing rifles before sunrise exposed everything. Then, from the darkness below the canyon, a single rifle shot suddenly echoed through the desert night. Every warrior in camp stood instantly, and a terrified voice shouted from the lower ridge. "The settlers are moving toward the Apache horses." The shout from the lower ridge shattered the fragile stillness of the camp like glass hitting stone. Apache warriors moved instantly, boots scraping. Across dirt, rifles lifted toward the darkness below while frightened horses jerked against their reins. Elias rose from beside the dying cedar fire and turned toward the canyon. More voices echoed now. Angry, confused, men shouting over one another somewhere beyond the rocks. Then another rifle shot cracked through the desert night, followed by the terrified sound of horses breaking loose. "No," Niyeli whispered beside him. "This is what Vane wanted." Elias already knew she was right. Chaos first, fear second, war after that. It was always the same pattern. He grabbed his hat from the ground and started moving downhill before anyone could stop him. Niyeli caught his wrist instantly. If you go down there now, they may kill you before you speak. Elias looked toward the growing panic near the lower ridge where silhouettes moved wildly through torchlight and dust. If nobody speaks, he said quietly, they will kill each other instead. The old elder stepped into their path, studying Elias beneath the shifting firelight. The elder's weathered face looked carved from the same stone surrounding the canyon. Ancient, tired, wise enough to recognize moments that changed history. You walk into frightened men tonight, the elder warned softly. Frightened men do not hear truth. Elias glanced toward the silver pendant still resting in his palm. Matto had tried to expose Silas Vane alone. That mistake had nearly buried the entire valley beneath blood. Maybe not, Elias answered. But somebody still has to say it. Before anyone could answer him, a group of Apache scouts came rushing up from the lower ridge. Dust covered their clothes. One of the younger men pointed back toward the canyon entrance with panic in his voice. Settlers are cutting loose the horses, he shouted. They say Apache scouts stole cattle from Black Creek tonight. Niyeli's jaw tightened instantly. That is impossible. Our riders never left camp. Elias looked toward the canyon below again and suddenly understood everything. Silas Vane did not need real attacks anymore. He only needed enough confusion for both sides to believe the lies already growing in their heads. The first frightened mistake would do the rest. Then the old sheriff's voice suddenly echoed through the canyon. Nobody moved. Sheriff Dawson rode into view below, surrounded by armed settlers holding lanterns high against the darkness. His face looked exhausted beneath gray stubble and sleepless eyes. We only came for answers, he shouted upward. One angry Apache warrior near Elias raised his rifle immediately. Liar. Several others followed. Elias saw the exact moment fear started turning into momentum. Men feeding off each other's anger. Too fast now. Too dangerous. Then another voice drifted upward from below. Calm. Smooth. Silas Vane. Ask the Apache where your missing cattle are, Sheriff. Elias closed his eyes briefly. There it was. One sentence. One spark tossed into dry grass. He stepped forward before the warriors beside him could react. The cattle are hidden near dry mesa. Elias shouted down into the canyon. Every head turned toward him instantly. Even the horses seemed to stop moving. Sheriff Dawson frowned from below. How would you know that? Elias stared directly at Silas Vane while answering. Because the same man who hid the rifles hid the cattle too. The canyon fell silent. Torchlight flickered across startled faces on both sides. Silas Vane smiled faintly beneath the brim of his black hat, but Elias noticed something important for the first time that night. The smile reached his mouth, not his eyes. Careful, cowboy, Vane called upward smoothly. Men have died over less than accusations. Elias slowly stepped farther down the ridge now, alone between both sides, dust crunching beneath his boots. Not accusations, he answered. Evidence. He lifted Matto's silver pendant high enough for both settlers and Apache warriors to see the broken horseshoe mark carved into the metal. Murmurs spread instantly through the canyon. Sheriff Dawson's face changed completely the moment he recognized the symbol. Silas, the sheriff said slowly, why would that mark be on the necklace of an Apache hostage? For the first time all night, Silas Vane did not answer immediately. The canyon held its breath after Sheriff Dawson's question. Torches flickered in the cold desert wind while settlers and Apache warriors stared across the darkness at one another, every hand still hovering near rifles that nobody wanted to fire first. Elias remained halfway down the ridge between both sides, Matto's silver pendant hanging from his fingers beneath the moonlight. For the first time since arriving at the canyon, Silas Vane looked uncomfortable. It lasted only a second, but Elias saw it clearly. Men who lived by lies always feared silence most, because silence gave people time to think. You are letting an ex-cavalry drifter poison your mind, Sheriff, Vane said calmly at last. That pendant proves nothing. Sheriff Dawson did not answer immediately. His tired eyes stayed locked on the broken horseshoe symbol carved into the silver. The same symbol burned into rifle crates. The same symbol carried by the men near Black Creek. The same symbol now hanging from the neck of an Apache hostage. Too many coincidences for one night. Where is Matto? Niyeli shouted from the ridge above. Her voice cut through the canyon sharper than the wind. Vane slowly looked upward toward her. Safe, he answered smoothly. As long as peace remains possible. Elias almost laughed at the lie. Peace was the one thing men, like Silas Vane, never protected. Peace made poor men stay alive, and rich men stop earning from fear. Sheriff Dawson shifted uneasily in his saddle. You told me Apache scouts kidnapped my son near Dry Mesa, he said slowly to Vane. You said you had witnesses. Vane's jaw tightened almost invisibly. And I do. Then why? Dawson continued. Does every trail tonight somehow lead back to your mark? Murmurs spread through the settlers behind him now. Nervous. Uncertain. Elias recognized the change immediately. Fear was losing its grip. Questions were replacing it. And questions were dangerous for men like Silas Vane. One of the settlers near the sheriff suddenly spoke up. My cousin saw Vane's wagons near Black Creek 2 nights ago. Another voice answered from farther back. Mine too. Vane's calm expression began cracking around the edges. You people are frightened and tired, he snapped. That cowboy is turning you against each other. No, Elias said quietly. From the ridge. You already did that yourself. The desert wind swept through the canyon, carrying sparks from dying torches into the night sky. Sheriff Dawson slowly removed his hat, rubbing one exhausted hand across his face. In that moment, Elias no longer saw a lawman preparing for war. He saw a grieving father finally realizing someone had been feeding his pain like dry wood into a fire. My son, Dawson whispered hoarsely. Did Apache scouts really take him? Silas Vane said nothing. That silence answered everything. The sheriff's shoulders dropped slightly, as though the truth weighed heavier than anger ever had. Then movement stirred near the back of Vane's riders. A figure slid weakly from horseback. Bound hands. Dust-covered clothes. Matto. Niyeli gasped softly behind Elias. Several Apache warriors nearly rushed forward before the old elder stopped them with one raised hand. Matto stumbled once before catching himself. Even from a distance, Elias could see exhaustion in the young Apache man's face. But alive. Still alive. Sheriff Dawson turned slowly towards Silas Vane, with disbelief spreading across his weathered face. You lied to all of us. Vane glanced around the canyon and finally understood the thing he had not expected tonight. Fear had changed sides. Not aimed at Apache, not aimed at settlers, aimed at him. Men began lowering rifles one by one. Apache warriors. Settlers. Nobody wanted to be the fool who fired first anymore. Silence reclaimed the canyon again, softer this time. Sadder. Like people waking from the same bad dream together. Elias slowly removed his revolver from its holster. Several men tensed instantly. But instead of aiming it, he bent down and placed the weapon quietly into the dirt between both sides. No more graves tonight, he said. The words drifted through the canyon beneath the cold desert wind. Nobody moved afterward. Nobody shouted. Somewhere high above the rocks, dawn finally began touching the edge of the Arizona sky with pale gray light. Niyeli walked slowly down the ridge toward Elias while the first morning breeze carried smoke away from the valley. She stopped beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunrise, beginning behind the canyon walls. Then, gently, she placed her hand against his chest once more. Now, she whispered softly, I choose you